Hi, everyone. I'm Rena Nine, and thank you for joining us. The House of Representatives will vote next week on whether President Trump will be the third president in U.S. history to be impeached. The House Judiciary Committee approved the measure in a party-line vote. Today's session lasted less than 10 minutes after Democrats and Republicans spent 14 hours debating the charges on Thursday. Republicans accused Democrats of abusing the process. After the vote, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler had a brief statement.
Today is a solemn and sad day. For the third time in a little over a century and a half, the House Judiciary Committee has voted articles of impeachment against the president for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The House will act expeditiously. Thank you.
An aide for House Democrats tells CBS News to expect the House to take up the vote as early as Wednesday of next week. White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham released the following statement after the vote. This desperate charade of an impeachment inquiry in the House Judiciary Committee has reached its shameful end. The president looks forward to receiving in the Senate the fair treatment and due process which continues to be disgracefully denied to him by the House. Here's how President Trump responded to the House Judiciary Committee's vote today.
It's a scam. It's something that shouldn't be allowed, and it's a very bad thing for our country. And you're trivializing impeachment. And I tell you what, someday there'll be a Democrat president and there'll be a Republican House, and I suspect they're going to remember it. Because when you do...
I want to bring in CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reid. So, Paula, we just heard from the president, his comments on the vote. But how else is the White House reacting to the House Judiciary Committee's vote?
Well, Rena, they're repeating a lot of their prior talking points, arguing that this is a sham, that this sets a dangerous precedent for future presidents, and insisting that this president did nothing wrong. Now, earlier in a meeting with the president of Paraguay, President Trump told reporters that to use the power of impeachment on this, quote, nonsense is a, quote, embarrassment to the country. Now, the president was also asked to weigh in on what he hopes that an eventual Senate trial will look like. The president wasn't as committed as he has been in the past, but he said he doesn't care if it's long or short, but he may prefer a longer trial because he wants to hear from the whistleblower. So, Reid, it appears the president is not so much focused on the process as he is on how it may help him sort of exact revenge.
I want to also bring in Siobhan Hughes, who's a Capitol Hill reporter for the Wall Street Journal. So, Siobhan, we're expecting a full House vote on impeachment, likely next week, potentially Wednesday. How does the Democratic leadership expect that to play out?
The Democratic leadership is counting on some defections from within their caucus, but the Democratic leadership thinks that they will definitely have enough to pass those articles. It only takes a simple majority. House Democrats have 233 votes, and they think that the number of defections is not going to be enough to keep them from lining up those numbers.
So, Siobhan, once the House votes on impeachment, lawmakers will select what they call impeachment managers for the Senate trial. What does that role, the person in that role, do? And do we have any names floating around at this point?
So the managers are the people who will present at the Senate trial. They function essentially as prosecutors. These House managers will be handpicked by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. I'm told the way to get that slot is to apply. Now, Mrs. Pelosi will take into account a number of considerations, the adeptness in a trial, of course, but also she's looking for kinds of diversity, geographic diversity, diversity based on ideology, diversity based on gender, racial makeup. And so look for the makeup of those House managers to very much reflect the makeup of the House Democratic caucus.
So,
some names, of course, are floating around. Adam Schiff, House Intelligence Committee Chairman, Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler are seen, of course, as shoo-ins because of their prominence in this process. Also people, though, Jim Himes, an Intelligence Committee member who is viewed by his colleagues as particularly articulate on some of these topics.
Interesting to hear those names floating around. Paul, the president said that he'd follow the lead of Senate Republicans in a potential trial. There was some confusion this week as to whether they would be on the same page. But here's what the president had to say earlier today.
I'll do whatever I want. Look, we did nothing wrong. So I'll do long or short. I've heard Mitch, I've heard Lindsey. I think they are very much in agreement on some concept. I'll do whatever they want to do. It doesn't matter. I wouldn't mind a long process.
So Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell met with White House officials yesterday. Paula, what are you hearing about the strategy the White House wants to present in the Senate trial?
Well, after this meeting, I am told that they are pretty confident that they can reconcile the vision the president has expressed for the trial and what Mitch McConnell would like to see. He'd like to see something sort of quick, rip off the Band-Aid, get through it, and not drag this out, not turn this into a circus. But publicly, even though today the president wasn't as aggressive about it, publicly, repeatedly, the president has insisted that he wants to call witnesses, that he wants his case to be heard. He wants his day in court. So going into this meeting yesterday, there was some tension between the White House and GOP leaders, but I'm told what has changed, what has really eased a lot of this tension is the fact that now they know exactly what is going to be in these articles of impeachment. And they're confident that they can easily convince the American people that this case is not supported by the facts. But of course, it's not just the American people they need to convince. They need to convince the president that he doesn't necessarily need to turn this into a show. He doesn't necessarily need to call Hunter Biden or Adam Schiff to make his case and to have that due process that the White House says he wants. Now, so far, they have not really agreed on the specific rules for the Senate trial. I'm told there will be continued conversations between the White House and GOP leaders throughout the next several weeks. But what Mitch McConnell has put forward so far looks pretty similar to the rules that they used in 1999 in the Clinton impeachment. And what's significant about that, Rena, is the fact that there is sort of some baked-in flexibility to rules like those. You can decide on a lot of big questions as you go. So if the president gets through the beginning of the process, believes that his case, his side has been heard, he may be able to decide that, in fact, he doesn't have to go all the way. He doesn't have to start trying to call the whistleblower and turn this into a big show.
So, Paul, we talked a little bit about who the Democrats might send to argue for impeachment. Do we know who the president is considering for his defense in a Senate trial?
Well, we know the White House counsel has been leading his defense in the impeachment, while he relied mostly on his personal attorneys throughout the special counsel investigation and other litigation that's been going on during his administration for impeachment. Because this is really focused on conduct in office, White House counsel Pat Cipollone has been taking the lead in defending him. Now, so far, there has not been a decision, I am told, on who would potentially argue a case, as it were, in the Senate. Right now, that decision has not been made by the president, but up until now, leading the defense has been Pat Cipollone. But yesterday, we learned the president is considering adding Alan Dershowitz to his team. Now, he's, of course, a constitutional scholar. I'm told that the hope would be that he could advise on some of the key constitutional issues here, especially because he's been such a vocal advocate for the president, defending him in the press. But Dershowitz does come with some baggage. He, of course, defended Jeffrey Epstein in 2006, and some of Epstein's victims have alleged that they were made available to Dershowitz as well. So that's a lot to bring into an already very contentious, controversial situation.
You know, Siobhan, your colleagues at the Wall Street Journal report Rudy Giuliani is doubling down on his push for Ukraine to conduct investigations in the 2016 campaign, as well as the Biden, somewhat undeterred by federal prosecutors probing his businesses or the impeachment inquiry. So he's got this evidence, so-called evidence, that he wants to present to the Republicans. Do you get a sense, do Senate Republicans want to work this in? How do they view this?
There will be some Senate Republicans who will be open to the evidence that Rudy Giuliani is gathering. This in spite of the fact that, according to my colleague's article, some of that evidence is coming from the Ukrainian prosecutors, the former prosecutors whom Western diplomats widely view as corrupt. But that said, a number of Republicans have embraced the notion that Ukraine meddled in the 2016 elections against the conclusions of the U.S. intelligence community. Also think that Burisma, the natural gas company on whose board Hunter Biden sat, needs to be looked into. And so it seems likely that at least in some quarters of the Republican conference, there will be some overlap between what Rudy Giuliani is probing and what Republicans want to address.
So, Siobhan, speaking of the Bidens, I want to ask you, House Republicans spent a lot of time discussing their need to hear directly from the former vice president as well as his son Hunter during this process. How likely do you think we are to hear from the Bidens in this trial?
It's hard to imagine that we will actually hear from the Bidens, but one thing that we could expect, and this gets to the issue of how to resolve those tensions between the White House and Mitch McConnell over a long trial versus a short trial, calling witnesses or not. My colleague Lindsay Weiss of the Wall Street Journal is reporting a way out of this would be to do the investigations through the committee process, perhaps have something like the Senate Judiciary Committee, Ron Johnson's committee, hold hearings looking into people like the whistleblower, raising issues about the Bidens. Even if these witnesses don't come in, that would at least be a way to ask them.
And Paula, you know, all of this is happening as Democrats and the president actually came to an agreement. This is actually really big news on a new North American trade deal. As a reminder, Mitch McConnell says that the Senate won't take it up until after impeachment. It seems like the House will vote the day after impeachment. Does the White House have any statement on that?
Well, the USMCA was going to be the president's signature trade deal. Rena, when I cover the president's rallies, I can tell you the biggest round of boos is usually for NAFTA. Folks are really focused on the president's ability to solidify these trade deals, to negotiate new deals. But after the president reached this agreement and he was waiting for Congress to approve it, impeachment sort of came in. But I've been tracking this. Throughout the impeachment process, I've been talking to an official here at the White House to ask about whether this was just, lost. But they continue to work, Rena. I was told that every week they were up on the Hill. They were capitalizing on long-standing relationships because they believed there was enough bipartisan support for the USMCA to push it across the finish line. Now, they were successful. They were able to reach a deal. But they had to make some compromises, and some Republicans are not particularly happy with some of the concessions that the administration ultimately had to make, specifically on labor protections and environmental regulations. So that's why this is receiving sort of a lukewarm reception from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and others. But at the end of the day, the president was able to get this deal, get everyone to the table and get them to agree. And this will be a signature accomplishment. But it's important to remember, one of the president's arguments against impeachment was that he said they're taking up all their time doing this. They're not doing any legislating. This deal really kind of undermines that defense against the impeachment process.
Such a good point. Paula, Reid, and Siobhan Hughes, thank you both. And there are a lot of moving parts to the impeachment inquiry, but we've been documenting all of them in real time. Be sure to check out our website. You can get caught up at any point. Just check out our blog. It's at cbsnews.com/impeachment.